Tonight we're plunging feet first, literally, into one of the strangest, scratchiest corners of Elizabethan theatre. Imagine yourself in a smoke-hazed, candle-lit wooden theatre. The planks beneath you groan with the weight of clapping crowds, perfume-masked nobles, and pigeons with questionable manners in the rafters. You duck backstage, past a half-dressed Falstaff cursing his missing belt, and right into a pile of mudded, mismatched socks tossed like forgotten stage props. Some are wool. Some are silk. Some smell like they've seen 3 wars and a bad dinner. One of them might still be damp from yesterday's Titus Andronicus matinee. And guess what? Those are the socks you're wearing tonight. Because tonight, you're an actor in Elizabethan London. You don't get your own socks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're on stage in a moment, and you feel it, the unmistakable chill of a drafty theatre crawling up your legs. It snakes under your doublet, winds past your hose, and pulls right around your calves. The only thing between your shins and this late autumn wind is a pair of theatre-issued stockings that are so thin, so overused, so shared, that you could swear they still echo the last guy's soliloquy. These socks, or rather these socks and several dozen others just like them, are passed from actor to actor, role to role, and yes, foot to foot. Because in the golden age of English drama, when Shakespeare's pen was shaping history and the Globe Theatre was packed with breathless crowds, something humbler, holier, even, was happening just out of sight. Desperate actors were swapping socks to make sure the show could go on. And it wasn't just socks. Tights, breeches, gloves, garters, nothing was personal property unless you were rich or recently lucky. But socks. Socks were the punchline and the tragedy all rolled into one. You see, clothing in Elizabethan England wasn't something you casually picked up at the local sale rack. It was wealth stitched in fabric. A single pair of finely woven hose might cost the equivalent of a week's wages. So, imagine you're a stage actor, underpaid, underfed, over-rehearsed, trying to perform a king's tragedy in borrowed stockings with someone else's sweat still stitched into the seams. Theatre life was glorious in imagination and grubby in reality. And backstage? A chaos ballet. Half-dressed men arguing over whose turn it is for the least threadbare pair. Someone's cutting up a worn-out cloak to make a new hat. Someone else is swearing they saw a mouse crawl out of the prop chest. And meanwhile, you're fighting for the only pair of socks that almost match your tights. They're both greenish, which you decide is good enough. What makes this even better or worse, depending on your standards, is the fact that these socks often had to be visible. Men's fashion was tight, theatrical, and full of leg. Think about the dramatic entrances, the flourishes of the leg as one takes a theatrical bow, or the scene where Romeo kneels in heartbreak. All of that. Sock-focused. And you, poor soul, are praying the audience is too far back to see the hole forming near your heel. Now, here's where it gets weirder. Socks weren't just items of necessity. They were regulated. Literally. Queen Elizabeth's sumptuary laws meant only certain classes could wear certain fabrics or colors. So, that fancy silk pair with gold thread you're tugging on tonight? Technically illegal for your station unless it's part of a performance. Which, lucky for you, it is. This legal loophole became one of the many blessings of being an actor. You could dress above your class, temporarily. For a few glorious hours, you were a prince, a lord, a general with velvet sleeves and embroidered hose. Then curtain call came, and you were back to elbowing a guy named Jeff for the least damp pair of knee socks. Historians still argue whether this level of sharing was primarily born from poverty or a tightly controlled wardrobe system. Some say acting troupes simply couldn't afford unique costumes for every player. Others believe the wardrobe was communal by design, an early form of sustainable fashion, if you want to get poetic. But one thing's certain, backstage was a battlefield, and socks were its spoils. You feel it now, as you take your place behind the curtain. Your feet itch slightly in the worn hose. The air is thick with candle smoke and the ghost of 50 previous shows. Someone whispers a line nervously. The crowd hushes. And as the curtain rises, you take one step forward in your borrowed socks, stained, stretched, possibly cursed, and deliver your opening line. That's theatre, baby. Equal parts glory and foot fungus. You step into the lights, one foot in front of the other, and immediately realize that your sock has slouched just enough to expose an inch of pale calf. Not ideal when you're playing a prince, but it could be worse. You could be barefoot, which, as it happens, is how many Elizabethan actors started out. Because here's the thing, costumes in the late 1500s and early 1600s were theatrical illusions, a blend of borrowed grandeur and stitched-up desperation. From a distance, you might look like royalty. Up close, you're more of a walking patchwork quilt. Your hose might have once belonged to a noble's dead uncle. Your jerkin probably smells faintly of mutton stew. And your socks, well, they've definitely had a busier social life than you. The cost of looking regal wasn't just high, it was absurd. Let's break it down. A decent full costume for a lead role might cost up to £10 sterling, which would be the rough equivalent of thousands of dollars today. And we're not talking about gold-threaded gowns or ermine-trimmed cloaks, that's just to look vaguely important from 20 feet away. Want silk hose? That's extra. Want them to match your outfit? Dream on. And unlike modern actors, Elizabethan players weren't given a generous wardrobe budget. Quite the opposite. Most acting companies operated on a shoestring, usually a literal one, and probably frayed. Costumes were the company's most expensive assets, often worth more than their stage or props combined. And most of them were second-hand, sourced from deceased nobles' closets or, when things got desperate, directly from tailors who hadn't been paid. Here's a fun twist. Nobles often left old clothes to their servants in wills. Those servants then sold the garments to costumers and theatre troupes. So while you might be playing Macbeth tonight, you're wearing a dead man's socks, and he probably wasn't Scottish. It wasn't just a case of hand-me-downs, it was death-me-downs. But not all borrowed fashion was free. If you wanted to look particularly sharp in your role, or if you were trying to impress someone in the audience, like a patron with spare coin, you might pay out of pocket to upgrade your look. Actors rented individual costume pieces the way you'd rent a tux. And socks. Those were premium rentals. A matching pair, cleanish and unpatched, could command more than a sword prop. Historians still debate how standardized these rentals were. Some claim there were detailed lists and rotating costume ledgers. Others believe the system was more chaotic, with actors haggling backstage like a Renaissance yard sale. I'll trade you this feathered hat for the red hose with the gold stripe. Only if they don't smell like Thomas again. Meanwhile, in the crowd, the illusion worked. Commoners in the pit were too focused on the drama to notice your wobbly socks. Nobles in the galleries admired the shine of your fake velvet doublet. Everyone believed in your princely costume except you, who could feel the heel of your borrowed stocking slowly unraveling. Backstage, the tension was constant. Socks disappeared. Accusations flew. Some actors stuffed extra pairs under their jerkin for safekeeping. Others bribed the costume master for first dibs. And the unlucky ones. They walked on stage with mismatched hose and tried to pretend it was a character choice. Fashion was so important, in fact, that some plays were rewritten or costumed specifically to flatter donors' preferences. Got a patron who loves blue? Suddenly, your entire cast is dressed in blue hose, and you're trying to make it look intentional. Even when the lighting makes you look like a cast of blueberry merchants. And then there was the drama off stage. Because with borrowed clothing comes borrowed pride, borrowed ego, borrowed scandal. What happens when two actors are promised the same costume piece? What happens when a pair of expensive socks vanishes the night before a royal performance? What happens when someone sews a tiny rude message into the cuff of your borrowed sleeve, and you don't notice until you've bowed to the Queen? Yes, that happened. Probably more than once. But there's something beautiful in this too. The effort, the improvisation, the sheer audacity of trying to appear majestic in worn wool and wishful thinking. Elizabethan actors weren't just performers. They were illusionists, costume wranglers, sock negotiators, and full-time miracle workers. And despite it all, they made it work. You can almost hear the applause now, echoing off the wooden rafters as you take your bow. Your sock is definitely sliding down your calf, and your knees are shaking from that tight pair of borrowed breeches, but in this moment, you're royalty. Until someone backstage whispers, "Oi, those are my socks." The first time someone hands you a pair of socks and says, "Guard these like your life depends on it," you laugh. Then you feel them, soft, tightly knitted, impossibly warm, and suddenly you're not laughing. Because these aren't just socks. They're hand-knit woolen treasure, more expensive than a sword, and twice as likely to be stolen. Knitted socks in Elizabethan England weren't an everyday item for most people. They were a luxury. And not just because of the materials, but because of the labor. Machine knitting wouldn't come around for another couple centuries, so every stitch had to be done by hand. That could take 20 to 40 hours per sock, depending on quality and detail. Let that sink in. 2 full work weeks for a single pair of foot coverings. You start to understand why a shared sock rotation system emerged in the theatre world, and why, on certain days, a missing sock could cause an actual fight. You're sitting on a rickety stool backstage now, tugging one on. It's tight, well-fitted, and still holds the faint scent of lavender sachets, either from the last actor who wore it or from some attempt to mask the scent of everyone who ever has. The socks you're holding are worsted wool. Fine stuff. Possibly from Norwich, the sock capital of England at the time. If you're extremely lucky, they might even be Italian silk. But that's wishful thinking. You're not playing a duke tonight. You're playing his jester. And silk's not for jesters unless the audience is paying extra. In the Elizabethan era, socks, or stockings, as they were often called, weren't tucked inside shoes like today. No, they were a fashion statement. Men's hose came in eye-popping colors: crimson, canary yellow, seafoam green. They were tied with garters and worn high, proudly showing off well-turned calves. A man's leg was a key part of his charm, and your stockings were your resume. Even Queen Elizabeth was obsessed. She reportedly adored silk stockings so much she had dozens of pairs. But you're an actor. A stagehand with delusions of nobility. And you're lucky if yours don't have holes. Still, there's something thrilling about it. You slip on a pair of socks and step into someone else's role. Tonight you're a prince. Tomorrow, a pirate. Next week, a ghost. The socks remain the same. The feet just rotate. Some troupes numbered them. Some stitched secret marks to keep track. But most just knew them by feel. Ah yes, this one's got that scratchy spot on the ankle from when someone tried to mend it mid-rehearsal with fishing line. And this one still smells faintly of pickled herring. Definitely from last week's Falstaff. Historians still argue whether actors personally owned even their underclothes or if everything, including the smalls, was property of the company. Some say actors had their own base garments and just borrowed the over-costumes. Others argue that full costume sharing extended all the way down to the garters. If you think about that too long, your socks start to feel extra haunted. Now, imagine the sheer demand. Plays were often performed 6 days a week, with different shows every day. That meant constant laundering, sort of, constant repairing, in theory, and constant arguing, definitely. Stockings were patched so often they eventually became more patch than sock. There are stories, possibly exaggerated, of socks being boiled backstage between shows. Less out of cleanliness, more to kill whatever might be nesting in them. You pretend not to notice the flecks of dried something on your heel as you lace your shoes over the wool. And speaking of laundry, there wasn't much. Most socks weren't washed between uses. If you got them after someone with strong feet, well, condolences. Some actors sprinkled herbs inside to try to mask the scent. Others turned them inside out and claimed they were clean. It was a ritual. A gamble. A test of fortitude. You remember one particularly bad week when half the company got food poisoning and there were bodily consequences. Those socks. Burned. Immediately. Sometimes, mercy wins. Still, when the curtain rises and the spotlight hits your legs, it's all worth it. The socks hug your calves just right. You look down and feel regal. No one in the audience sees the mended toe or knows the lineage of these socks. You're just a character. Someone timeless. A whisper backstage, "Hey, those are the socks from the Romeo who fainted during the duel last month." You nod. You can still feel a bit of his ghost in the heel. You wear them anyway. Because in Elizabethan theatre, socks weren't just clothing. They were memory. Legacy. A kind of communal relic that passed from roll to roll like a candle in a long night. Maybe you'll add to that memory tonight. Just, try not to bleed in them. You shuffle your way to the dressing area, your newly acquired socks pulled up high, still holding their shape despite being worn by more actors than you can count. The makeshift dressing space buzzes with energy, laughter, line rehearsals, urgent whispers about misplaced wigs. But beneath it all, you feel it. That tension. That unspoken rule. Status matters even here, even backstage, even in your socks. See, this isn't just a group of players. This is a microcosm of Elizabethan society. And in that society, every thread, buckle, and stocking has something to say about where you stand. Literally. It starts subtly. The actors playing nobles get first pick of the nicer stockings. Not officially, of course, but unofficial rules run deeper than written ones. The leads and company stars, often senior or better connected, tend to have their favorite socks unofficially reserved. They appear early, lay a hand on their preferred pair, and just like that, the hierarchy is reinforced. You, still a minor player, are lucky to get the ones that don't crunch when you unroll them. But the class divide runs deeper than who gets the socks. It's sewn into the very fabric of the theatre world. At the top are the noble patrons, men who fund the troupe in exchange for prestige and the occasional front row seat. Below them, the leading men, respected and often decades into their careers. Further down, the journeyman players, skilled but still scrapping for leads. Below them, the apprentices, typically teenage boys, sometimes playing female roles, and sometimes getting stuck with the socks no one else wants. Then come the hired extras, the bit players, the boys who carry spears and say nothing. Some of them don't even get socks. They stuff scraps of fabric into their boots and hope the audience isn't watching too closely. And at the very bottom, the stagehands. Sometimes barefoot. Always underappreciated. One of them mutters as he sweeps past you, "Socked be nice, once in a while." You offer him your extras, if you had any. It wasn't just inside the theatre. Outside, too, people noticed. Audiences in Elizabethan London were acutely aware of fashion and social cues. Clothing was a status symbol as potent as a title. When an actor took the stage in a dazzling costume, even one stitched together from cast-offs, it shaped how the character was perceived. The difference between rich man and comic relief could hang on the quality of your hosiery, which led to some creative deception. Actors learned to fake wealth with posture and lighting. Socks with carefully placed embroidery could mimic the look of silk. Threadbare patches were hidden beneath boot cuffs. And if your left stocking had a hole the size of a shilling, you angled your body so the right leg faced the audience. Still, historians argue whether these tricks actually worked or whether audiences were just too polite or distracted to care. Some scholars believe viewers were in on the illusion, part of the game. Others suggest the illusion only had to last until the next laugh line or sword fight. But the tension backstage? That was very real. You witness a scuffle between two actors over a particularly fine pair of black wool hose, double-stitched, trimmed in ribbon, and famously worn during last year's royal performance. They're like celebrity socks now. Whoever wears them tonight gets a whisper of their former glory. Even actors not in costume feel the sting of class. Meals are eaten separately, some with wine and meat, others with stale bread and apples. The dressing space, though technically shared, has unofficial zones. Leads near the mirror. Juniors in the corner. You take your spot next to a cracked wall, the plaster crumbling a bit behind your elbow. And then there's the shoe pile. In theory, actors share footwear too. In practice, shoes are fiercely guarded. They hold form, retain smell, and mold to the foot. A good pair can elevate a performance. A bad one? Twist your ankle mid-monologue. The unlucky actor assigned a bad shoe-sock combo becomes the backstage pariah, pitted and politely avoided. You begin to notice other divides as well. Some actors carry perfumes, dabbing them onto their stockings to mask the rewear. Others have better sewing skills, mending their socks with delicate stitches rather than quick knots. And some, they just have connections. The wardrobe keeper likes them. The costumer owes them a favor. That's worth more than a full coin purse in this world. Of course, everyone pretends the playing field is equal. All the world's a stage, right? But the stage, like the world, has its secret hierarchies. And the socks you wear say more than you'd like. One actor jokes, as he tugs on a mismatched set, one foot's a duke, the other's a drunk. You laugh, but silently agree. Still, there's a strange camaraderie in all of this. Shared humiliation. A collective understanding that no one here is truly above the others. You may play kings and clowns, lovers and ghosts, but backstage, you all fight for the same few pairs of socks. And when the curtain lifts, you find yourself next to the actor who scowled at you earlier over the last decent pair. For the next 2 hours, you're brothers. Co-stars. He bleeds on you during the duel scene. You wipe it off, quietly hoping he didn't ruin the heel. Then the scene ends. Applause erupts. And as you both exit, he turns, offers a quiet nod, and says, "They're yours tomorrow." And just like that, the socks become a currency of trust, too. You reach down to adjust the sag in your borrowed stockings and discover, not for the first time, that the elastic is a complete fantasy. There is no elastic. Just a frayed bit of ribbon that you try to knot tighter around your thigh, hoping it holds for the next act. It won't. But pretending helps. You dig through the trunk, more of a glorified wooden box with moldy corners than any elegant wardrobe, and search for a second pair. Nothing. Just a moth-eaten sleeve and someone's discarded rough collar, still stained with what may be pomegranate juice or possibly stage blood. You're not about to smell it to find out. It hits you then, not just the cold draft curling under the stage boards, but the reality, you don't own anything here. Not the socks. Not the sword at your belt. Not even the codpiece you're expected to strut around in while monologuing about love and betrayal. In the Elizabethan theatre world, the actors didn't own their costumes. That was the domain of the acting company or, more specifically, the company's investors and wardrobe keepers. These people controlled the flow of tights, tunics, and yes, stockings. If you were lucky enough to wear a particularly fine pair of hose, it was not because you earned it. It was because someone assigned it to you, or forgot to assign it to someone else. And the company didn't own the costumes because it was generous. No, costumes were assets. Financial investments to be used, reused, patched, dyed, resized, and worn until they fell apart, and then stitched up again into something vaguely wearable. Think of a Frankenstein closet built from 20 dead garments and you're close. So where did all these clothes come from? Not from tailors, at least, not directly. No, most theatre costumes came from second-hand sources. You had noble cast-offs, dead men's fashion, sold cheap. Servants' resale, inherited clothes, sold to theatres. Pawn shops, actors pawning costume pieces after shows, then buying them back later. Theft, yes, sometimes garments just walked off noble washing lines. You dig deeper in the trunk and find a balled-up sock that's been mended so many times it's barely recognizable. Still warm. Someone else was probably wearing this 30 minutes ago. You hesitate, then roll it up over your foot. It's damp. It's tight. It smells vaguely like rosemary and regret. Some actors tried to have their own pieces, vanity items, lucky garments. A favorite doublet, a good-fitting pair of breeches. But socks? Almost never. They wore out too fast and cost too much. So they lived in the company trunk, a communal puddle of hosiery, passed around like stale bread. Imagine sharing your underwear drawer with 20 other people, none of whom believe in soap. Now add performance sweat, summer heat, stage panic, and a 6-day work week. Yes, it was that bad. Historians still argue whether there were formal systems for sock assignment or if it was pure backstage anarchy. Some troupes may have had a wardrobe master who logged which items went to which actor, more for inventory than hygiene. Others likely operated on first-come, first-wear rules, which led to scrambles, arguments, and possibly more than one performance ruined by the wrong actor wearing the wrong costume. One tale, possibly apocryphal, tells of two actors mistakenly swapping roles in Julius Caesar because each thought the other's socks signaled the correct part. Caesar was stabbed with suspiciously comic timing that night. There were other issues. Illness, for example. If one actor fell sick, their socks didn't get a break. They got reassigned. No washing. No quarantine. Just a polite try not to touch your face before curtain up. If you were the unlucky soul who got the flu socks, well, you performed feverishly in more ways than one. You notice a superstition forming among the older players. Some refuse to wear socks from certain shows. Bad luck socks, they whisper. The ones worn during the thunderstorm performance. You know. The lightning incident. You nod like you know. You don't ask questions. Others do little rituals. One player always sprinkles mint into his hose. Another whispers apologies to the pair he's taking. A third insists on always putting the left sock on first, because that's the lucky foot. Tonight, someone's left a note in the sock pile. Don't wear the red ones. Still cursed. You pretend not to notice. You take the red ones. As you roll them up your legs, you consider what these socks have seen. Sword fights. Love scenes. Monologues under torchlight. You wonder if they remember any of it, if the threads themselves are stitched with memory. Every hole, every faded thread a relic of the performances they've endured. One actor once claimed his socks helped him get into character. They still smell like Henry IV, he'd say proudly. You're not sure what that's supposed to mean, but you appreciate the dedication. Eventually, you make peace with the socks you've chosen, or more accurately, the ones that have chosen you. They're a little itchy, a little crooked, but they're warm. Mostly. And they'll get you through another night. That's how it goes here. You don't own your socks. You inherit them. Like a legacy. Like a burden. Like a quietly squishy, slightly cursed handshake from the ghosts of roles past. You walk toward the wings, feet squishing slightly, and take a deep breath. The play awaits. Your lines are ready. Your socks are tolerable. The curtain rises. You're halfway into your costume now, jerkin pulled tight, ruff fastened slightly off-center, and your hand blindly groping inside the shared trunk for that elusive second sock. Instead, your fingers graze something rough, stiff with old sweat and wax, a faded pair of tights, crumpled next to a chainmail vest that's definitely made from painted rope. You pull the sock from the depths of the trunk and realize this one's historic. Not in the Shakespearean sense. In the has survived things no fabric should survive sense. You tug it on, despite its crunchy feel, and wonder how many plays it's lived through. How many roles? How many feet? Because that's the thing about Elizabethan theatre, one trunk could hold all the world. Actors didn't have individual dressing rooms, vanity tables, or even proper pegs to hang their clothes. They had trunks. Massive wooden boxes, overflowing with every costume, prop, accessory, and sock the company owned. These trunks weren't just storage, they were stagecraft in a box, condensed, chaotic, and surprisingly well-traveled. You see, troupes didn't always perform in fixed theatres like the Globe. Many were travelling players, carting their trunk from town to town, in yard to noble estate to village square. It was theatre on wheels, and the trunk was everything. One trunk. One company. 15 actors. 30 roles. 0 duplicates. You imagine the logistics now. Every role from a peasant to a prince, a nun to a necromancer, a ghost to a goose, all crammed into a single box. Garments were multi-role. A green cloak became a nobleman's robe in one scene, a forest sprite's shawl in the next, and a horse blanket in a pinch. And the socks. Oh, the socks were everywhere. Wadded into corners, stuffed into sleeves, tied together in hopeful pairs with fraying twine. You pull out one such pair, navy wool, surprisingly soft, and only mildly stained. A win. You brace yourself as you slip your foot inside, half expecting something to scurry out. Thankfully, nothing moves. Today's a good day. Now imagine that same trunk after a week on the road. Rain-soaked. Jostled over mud roads. Crushed in the back of a cart. By the time it arrives at the next venue, the costumes inside are mashed into a heap of wrinkles, sweat, and stage dust. Actors scramble to iron them using flat irons heated over fires if they're lucky, or, more likely, just smoothing them over a knee and praying no one notices. Socks were at the bottom of the priority pile. No time to wash them. No place to dry them. And no extra pair to swap in. So they were wrung out, if you had water, flapped dry in the sun, if it wasn't raining, or just reworn. Cold. Damp. Regretful. You remember one particularly awful travel day. The company wagon tipped into a shallow ditch outside Stratford. The actors scrambled to rescue the costume trunk as muddy water seeped in. Some garments survived. Others, like the leather boots and one unforgettable pair of crimson hose, were deemed unsalvageable. May they rest in pieces. Historians still debate how often these travelling trunks were replenished. Some argue companies restocked in London whenever possible, buying cheap from second-hand markets. Others believe trunks were semi-sacred collections added to slowly over years, with items repaired until they disintegrated. Judging by the sock you just tugged over your heel, patched with thread that doesn't even match, you'd wager the latter. And speaking of repairs, meet the unsung hero of the trunk system, the costumer or wardrobe keeper. This poor soul, often a stage manager, actor, or apprentice doubling as all three, was in charge of tracking, maintaining, and let's be honest, resuscitating every item in that trunk. They worked miracles with needle and thread. They kept grease paint from staining roughs. They washed socks occasionally, under duress. And they knew every actor's quirks. Will only wear the grey hose. Swears the red pair brings luck. Claims the green pair itches like it's possessed. One costumer famously created a sock rotation schedule after two actors nearly came to blows over a particularly clean pair. It worked for a week. Then someone bribed the apprentice who kept the schedule and the whole system collapsed in scandal. The trunk wasn't just for costumes either. It held props, wooden daggers, fake coins, pewter goblets, lengths of red ribbon for blood effects. And yes, backup socks. Usually mismatched, often damp, and occasionally doubling as rags for wiping down boots. The result? Every trunk developed a personality. You could tell which company had opened shop just by the smell of their trunk pipe smoke, stale lavender, and the lingering scent of candle wax mixed with aged wool. You remember a time when one actor, new to the troupe, opened the trunk, took one whiff, and said, "Smells like ambition," and someone's feet. He was not wrong. Yet for all its shortcomings, the trunk was magic. It held kings and queens, battles and banquets, ghosts and gods. And at the very heart of it, those humble, scratchy, endlessly reused socks. Because without those, the illusion cracked. A nobleman without hose was just a man in a tunic. A soldier without boots was just a farmer holding a stick. And an actor barefoot? That just made people uncomfortable. So you tighten your garters, roll up your sleeves, and brace for curtain. One sock slipping a little, the other feels damp near the toe, and the whole outfit smells like a hayloft. But the trunk has spoken. This is your costume now. And the show must go on. You've made it through the first act. Barely. You're sweaty, your legs ache, and there's a concerning squeak in your left knee every time you bow. But more pressingly, you can feel something moist pooling in your sock. You pray it's just stage sweat. You do not look down. Because tonight, you drew the short straw. Literally. The costume trunk was down to the dregs, and someone handed you a pair of socks that, by the smell alone, haven't seen daylight or soap in a while. They're soft in the way overused wool becomes soft, and clammy in the way that makes your skin crawl. Still, you wore them. You had to. But now you're wondering, how much shared foot sweat is too much? And more importantly, what exactly are you risking? Let's talk about Elizabethan hygiene, or more accurately, the complete lack thereof. Soap existed, technically. So did water. But the idea of daily washing, especially of clothes, was far from common. Laundry was laborious, expensive, and often done with harsh lye that could destroy fabric. So most garments, including socks, weren't washed after each wear. Or even after each week. You didn't just inherit someone's hosiery. You inherited their fungus. Historians and medical researchers alike agree, foot hygiene was not a priority. Blisters, rashes, fungal infections, and worse, these were standard occupational hazards. Especially in the theatre, where tights and hose were shared like goblets at a wedding feast. It wasn't unusual for actors to develop foot rot, or to suffer from sweating sickness, a mysterious condition that might have been worsened by heavy woolen clothing worn day after day without airing. You slip off your boot during a scene change and catch a whiff so alarming, even the prop dog sniffs and walks away. Actors had coping methods, of course. Some sprinkled talcum powder or ground herbs, lavender, mint, even crushed rose petals into their socks. Others lined them with thin cloth scraps. But mostly, they just ignored the issue. If your toes were still attached at the end of the night, you counted it as a win. Now here's the truly delightful part. It wasn't just about odor or athlete's foot. You were also sharing socks with people who might be harboring syphilis, scabies, or lice. Personal space, as a concept, did not apply here. And while it may sound like a medieval exaggeration, syphilis was rampant in Elizabethan England. Medical records from the time describe all kinds of treatments, From mercury rubs, don't try that at home, to sweating cures in wooden steam boxes. But for actors, there was a more casual approach. Just keep acting and hope no one notices the sores. One legend, probably untrue, but deliciously terrifying, speaks of a pair of hose that caused 3 actors to fall ill in succession. The socks were quietly buried behind the theater, a tiny woolen funeral held at midnight. The wardrobe keeper refused to discuss it afterward. Some actors developed superstitions. Never wear socks on Fridays. Always wear mismatched hose for comic roles. Never share with the man who plays Richard III. Whether these rituals worked is questionable. But they added a layer of psychological comfort, which, given the state of your toes right now, seems deeply necessary. Historians still argue whether costume trunks were ever fumigated or cleaned. Some suggest occasional smoke treatments, where clothes were hung over smoking herbs to ward off pests. Others believe that socks, being low priority, were simply rotated until they fell apart. One scholar jokingly referred to Elizabethan stockings as fun gal pass the parcel. And let's not forget the weather. You're performing outside. Open-air theaters like the Globe didn't have heating. When it rained, and it often did, you performed wet. Water seeped into your shoes, your hose, and yes, your socks. A cold, damp sock was practically a guarantee. And once soaked, it stayed soaked for hours. Wool doesn't dry quickly, especially when worn under 3 layers of costume and a codpiece the size of a dinner plate. You remember a performance of King Lear during a thunderstorm. Not a staged one, a real one. Lightning crackled, the heavens opened, and Lear raged while his actor developed a minor case of trench foot. His socks never recovered. Neither did his big toe. But the worst was when socks went missing. Not stolen, just misplaced. One actor wore a pair on stage and, in the chaos of scene changes, took them home. The next night, panic. Costume changes thrown into disarray. Someone had to go barefoot in Act 2. The audience was horrified. After that, the company implemented a sock count. Each night, the costumer would shout, 15 in, 15 out, as if tallying livestock. And still, socks vanished. You wonder now, how many have you worn? How many have worn you? You pull at the seam near your ankle and see a loose thread. You know better than to tug it. That's how you ended up with a half-unraveled sock mid-performance last spring. You played a duke that night. The audience thought it was a political metaphor. And then there's the psychological aspect. The quiet dread that builds as you realize just how intimate socks really are. They're not flashy. They're not dramatic. But they're close to you. Closer than your wig, your sword, your lines. They know your rhythm. They shape to your feet. And when you put on someone else's socks, you're stepping into more than a role. You're stepping into their sweat, their fears, their forgotten crumbs and lingering ailments. Still, you wouldn't trade it. Because when the lights go up, when the crowd gasps, when your soliloquy lands, none of that matters. Your socks could be cursed. They could be damp. They could belong to a man who died screaming from foot rot. But for these moments, you're alive. And your feet are tolerably warm. You've finally made it to the edge of the stage. The moment hangs still. The cue is yours. You breathe in, straighten your spine, and make your entrance, your legs leading the way in worn, glorious, painfully snug hose. The audience doesn't see the laddered heel or the hastily stitched toe. They see majesty, confidence, Elizabethan swagger. And that's because those socks you're wearing, however battered, were designed to dazzle. Let's back up a bit. You might think socks are just socks. Foot tubes. Padding. But in the 16th century, they were fashion armor. A bold statement. An optical trick. Think less warmth and comfort, and more look at my calves and swoon. For Elizabethan men, especially actors playing nobility, a well-clad leg was the equivalent of a six-pack. A powerful symbol of grace, health, and wealth. So socks weren't hidden, they were showcased. Pulled tight. Highlighted with colored garters. Carefully chosen to match your doublet, your cloak, your family crest. Theatrical costuming leaned into this visual language with gusto. Tonight, you're wearing a pair of theatrical Venetians, wide-bottomed hose that reach just below the knee, where they meet your shared woolen stockings. If you were truly fancy, they'd be made of fine silk or wool dyed in rare colors like Tyrian purple or cochineal red. But this pair, they're beige-ish. Originally cream, maybe, with enough wear to make them look more like damp parchment. Still, they hold their shape. They grip your calves. They've got character. And in a strange way, they also give you power. On stage, status is about silhouette. A lowly servant. Saggy hose. An aristocrat. Tall, tight socks and a swagger to match. The audience reads it instantly. So when you stride out in high-gartered hose that make your legs look a foot longer, you're not just acting noble, you're wearing nobility. Costume designers of the time, yes, even back then there were professionals in charge of this chaos, understood this visual language. They stitched in padding to enhance the curve of the calf. They dyed hose in brilliant hues that could catch torchlight and hold a crowd's attention. They starched and brushed and stretched them for days before a major performance. But, of course, you're part of a company. Which means you're sharing all that artistry with a dozen other actors. And some of them aren't as careful as you. Some tug too hard and rip a seam. Some leave makeup streaks down the leg from frantic changes. One infamous Falstaff in your company once sweated through a pair so thoroughly, they mildewed. They were left out to dry and forgotten, for 3 weeks. The rats wouldn't even touch them. Still, you persist. Because when you step into a good pair, well-fitted, cleanish, a little extra give at the arch, you feel transformed. That's not an exaggeration. Studies of costuming and performance psychology have shown that wearing particular garments, even shared ones, can physiologically alter your confidence and focus. Your brain associates the pressure of the socks with the role. The tighter the fit, the deeper the character. Actors in the Globe didn't have research papers. But they knew. They could feel it. Some even had favorite pairs. Not owned, of course, but unofficially theirs. A garter they always used. A certain set of striped hose that made them feel taller. One actor you know insists his best Hamlet performances only happen in the faded green pair with the patched heel. No one questions it. The socks deliver. It's worth noting that socks also served a practical function on stage. Long speeches, sword fights, comedic tumbles, actors needed grip, flexibility, and a surprising amount of ankle stability. Without decent hose, you risked slipping on the wooden boards or tearing fabric mid-lunge. One actor tore through 2 pairs in a single week, each during different duels. He now ties a ribbon under the arch of his foot for extra security. No shame in sock hacks. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan socks had reinforced toes and heels like modern pairs. Some say yes, high-end ones were woven with double-thickness wool or even silk thread reinforcement. Others argue most stage socks were patched together, so often it hardly mattered. Either way, the result was the same. A dazzling display for the crowd. Imagine being in the front row of the Globe, craning your neck, watching Henry V charge onto the stage. His cape flares. His boots gleam. And just above them, flash a glimpse of cardinal red stocking, smooth as satin, gliding forward with authority. You gasp. Your neighbor faints. Somewhere, a foot fetish is born. And that's not even counting coded fashion language. Yellow hose. Dangerous flirt. Black hose. Mourning or murder. Patterned hose with slashing. Wealth and rebellion. Audiences read this like subtitles. Actors used it like punctuation. So when your character steps out tonight in modest grey socks, you know exactly what they're saying. I'm respectable. Thoughtful. Possibly hiding a knife. You make it through your monologue. Applause. You retreat backstage, breathless. You peel your socks down an inch and feel the fabric cling to your skin like second nature. You glance to your left and see another actor tugging on the same socks you wore last week. He doesn't notice the stain near the ankle. He won't. But you know it's there. And when he steps out onto the stage, into the very role you wore yesterday, it's not just the lines he's inheriting. It's the silhouette. The rhythm. The whisper of a performance that clings to the threads like invisible memory. The socks remember. They always do. You're crouched behind a painted canvas tree, waiting for your cue to stagger on stage as a drunken nobleman. The socks you're wearing are unfamiliar, itchy in that wrong kind of wool way, and someone has clearly darned them with a thread too thick. It's like walking with a caterpillar under your heel. You try not to wince. But you also wonder, whose socks were these yesterday? The answer might surprise you, a woman. Or at least, someone playing one. Elizabethan theatre had a twist you already know: no female performers. Women on stage were a legal and social impossibility until 1660, which means Juliet, Lady Macbeth, Desdemona, and every milkmaid or duchess in between. All played by boys or young men. And yes, they wore the same socks. You heard that right. Your scratchy, slightly floral-scented wool socks may have graced the legs of Rosalind just yesterday. Today, you're Sir Toby Belch. Different character. Same hose. Cross-dressing on stage was not just a workaround, it became a defining trait of Elizabethan drama. Shakespeare especially leaned into it. Boys playing girls pretending to be boys in plays like Twelfth Night and As You Like It. Layers upon layers of theatrical onion. But for you, backstage, it means navigating a chaotic communal sock bin that doesn't care about gender roles. There are no labeled drawers. No dainty female stockings versus rugged male ones. Just bundles of fabric sorted roughly by size, stretch, and color fastness. The stage manager holds up a pair of soft blue hose. These'll do for Ophelia. You recognize them instantly. You wore them as Mercutio last month. Got rained on in them during a rogue thunderstorm. Nearly died of cold. You hand them over with a wry smile. There's something oddly intimate about it. Not in a romantic way, more like a silent fraternity, a communion of feet across roles and genders. The socks become a point of connection. A reminder that you are all, regardless of part, actors in the same game. Sharing the same garments. Sharing the same dreams. Historians still argue whether cross-dressing actors had special costume privileges, like silk underlayers or looser hose to allow for padding and shaping. Some claim experienced boy actors had their favorite socks, reserved for high roles. Others argue the chaos was absolute. Whoever got to the basket first, won. You once knew a lad who insisted on always wearing a pink garter when playing female roles. For softness, he claimed. But it was really superstition. He said it gave him better projection. That's theatre logic for you. Of course, audiences were very aware that women on stage were men in disguise. That was part of the appeal. A strange mix of illusion and acknowledgement. It allowed playwrights to explore themes of identity, attraction, and disguise without breaking taboos. The socks, in this metaphor, were literal threads connecting all these layers of performance. There's a record of one boy actor slipping during a dance, his too long stockings bunching at the ankle, exposing the hairy legs beneath his petticoats. The audience laughed so hard the play had to stop. Lesson learned: sock length matters. But not just for cross-dressing roles. Everyone knew that a good sock fit made or broke a scene. Slouchy hose on Juliet. Scandal. Tattered seams on Queen Margaret. Treasonous. You once watched a performance of Richard III where the villain's stocking sagged so dramatically it became a running joke. Every time he limped, the crowd howled. Yet somehow, that's the magic. These shared, overused, constantly repurposed socks were part of the performance. They picked up the rhythm of the stage, the tension of scenes, the echoes of laughter. They saw tragedy, comedy, betrayal, and slapstick often in a single day. And they didn't judge. Whether worn by a boy queen or a drunken soldier, the socks just did their job. They stretched, clung, itched, warmed, absorbed, and adapted. They became silent actors themselves, co-stars in a grand illusion that fooled and delighted thousands. You hear your cue. You stumble out, voice slurred, movements exaggerated. The socks itch, but they hold. The left one is slipping slightly, but it matches the clumsiness of your character. A happy accident. The crowd laughs. You lean into it. You twirl. You bow. Your sock snags a nail in the floorboard, tiny tear at the toe, but you carry on. No one notices. No one but you. Backstage, you peel them off with a sigh of relief. Someone's waiting for them. Another performance. Another illusion. They tug them on without hesitation. They're playing a nun in the next act. The socks switch genders yet again, no complaints, no confusion. Because in this world, socks don't care who you are. They just carry the story forward. And tomorrow, they'll do it all again. You wake up to a cold wooden floor and the faint smell of onions from someone's breakfast. No, you didn't fall asleep in the costume loft again, you're just lying in a back corner of the tiring house, sockless, still half in costume, wondering why your knees ache like you danced a full mask with a cannon strapped to each leg. And then it hits you, last night's sword fight. The lunges. The leaping. The dramatic knee slide you probably didn't need to do, but did anyway because the audience gasped. You smile to yourself. Worth it. Still, your socks didn't fare as well. One tore across the heel. The other, lost. Probably stolen. It happens more than anyone admits. Socks disappear. Constantly. This section of your life and history is defined by what you might call the sock shuffle. Because when you share socks with a dozen other actors, ownership is more of a suggestion. Each morning starts with a scramble to the communal sock basket, a stitched-together wicker monstrosity that smells like damp wool and ambition. You dig, you tug, you sniff test. You hope. But you rarely get a matching pair. See, the Elizabethan theatre system doesn't exactly come with labelled laundry or personal storage bins. You might have your own doublet, maybe your own boots, but socks. They go into the wash if you're lucky and re-emerge months later, if ever. Most actors develop sock instincts. A sixth sense. A specific tug or fold or stretch that tells you, this was mine 2 Thursdays ago when I played Horatio. The left one still has a wine stain. Familiar. Sometimes, a stagehand will repurpose an especially threadbare pair as prop stuffing, padding out a loot case, bulking up a fake turkey leg. You once opened a treasure chest mid-scene and found 3 socks curled like slugs inside. Improvised gold, apparently. Historians still argue whether companies kept detailed inventories of socks and stockings. Some ledgers mention 12-pair woolen hose, mixed condition. Others are suspiciously silent. Was this bureaucratic oversight, or deliberate avoidance? No one wants to explain why half their socks are missing and the rest smell like onions. You once tried to claim a pair as your own. Embroidered your initials in red thread on the cuff. Within 2 days, someone else had worn them inside out and added a second set of initials. W.B. Williams something? Walter. No one admits it. Now the socks are a shared artifact, a bizarre duel of ownership. You still wear them, sometimes. Out of spite. There's a kind of sock economy that runs beneath the surface of the company. New actors bring new pairs. Old actors hoard the softest ones in their trunks. A senior player might lend a prized pair to a favored understudy, but only with a threat attached. Bring them back clean, or I'll write you out of the will. A young actor once sewed bells into the cuffs of his stockings for a clown role and forgot to remove them. The next person to wear them, playing a ghost, jingled through the entire haunting scene. The audience roared. The director did not. Despite all this, you keep showing up. Because even the oldest, scratchiest, most mismatched socks carry something valuable, the echo of past performances. They've walked every scene, heard every speech, absorbed the sweat of tragedy, the footfalls of comedy, the electricity of live theatre. It's said that Shakespeare himself wore a pair of borrowed hose in his final performance. Probably unwashed. Probably stretched from someone twice his size. But he didn't care. The show went on. You think about this as you slip on two completely different stockings, one dark green, one nearly see-through, and pull your breeches down over them. One sags slightly. The other pinches. But together, they make a whole. And that's all you need. Out on the stage, the audience won't notice. They'll be looking at your face, your words, your gestures. They won't care that your left sock smells like celery and your right one used to belong to a girl playing a queen. Or maybe they will notice. Maybe there's a boy in the front row who sees your sock peeking out and wonders why it doesn't match. Maybe that tiny detail lodges in his brain, plants a seed, and one day he'll write a play where nothing matches on purpose. You never know who's watching. You never know what part of you they'll remember. So you straighten your legs, roll your shoulders, and walk out into the light, your mismatched socks the most honest part of your costume. Because in this theatre, imperfection is the rule. And somehow, that makes the story even stronger. Besides, if your socks matched, people might think you were pretending. And we can't have that now, can we? You're squinting into the candlelit wings, waiting for your cue, and your socks are slouching like they've just given up on life. You give them a subtle tug, praying they won't puddle at your ankles mid-soliloquy. They've seen better days, holes at the toe, weird stiffness near the top, and what might be a suspicious gravy stain from last week's feast scene. But tonight, they're supposed to be the socks of a prince. And you sell the illusion. Because in the Elizabethan theatre, illusion was everything. Nowhere was that more evident than in the world of costuming. For an audience that paid extra to sit close enough to count your nose hairs, clothes mattered. They didn't just suggest wealth or station, they announced it, shouted it, waved it around like a flag. So when it came to creating a nobleman out of a penniless apprentice actor, the company leaned hard on one trick above all, hammer-down grandeur. See, many of the most lavish garments in an actor's trunk weren't made for the stage at all. They were cast-offs, sometimes literally, from the noble class. Here's how it worked. When a wealthy aristocrat passed away or outgrew his wardrobe, usually the former, his clothing might be sold off in estate sales or passed on to servants. Enter the sharp-eyed theatre men, who'd snap up these garments for a fraction of their original worth. Suddenly, the same doublet that once graced the court of Queen Elizabeth is reborn on stage as King Lear's robe. The satin hose that strutted through a court banquet now stomps across the Globe Theatre stage with a wooden sword above them and 3 reused socks beneath. Yes, 3. That's not a typo. Actors often layered socks, either for extra warmth or because no single pair matched or survived long enough to stand alone. One actor was known for always wearing one full sock over 2 partial ones, like a theatrical nesting doll of hosiery. He swore it improved his posture. Historians still argue whether actors ever intentionally mismatched socks to show class on stage, perhaps a fraying heel for a beggar, or dyed silk for a duke. Some say it was done for economy. Others believe it added subtle realism, a textured authenticity. What's certain is this: even the best costumes were patchworks of past lives. The velvet robe might be lined with sackcloth. A gold-embroidered sleeve could be pinned to a bodice that barely held together. And underneath it all, socks. Always socks. Ragged, mismatched, borrowed socks. One fringe detail that never fails to amuse: a diary entry from an actor complaining that his lord's hose do chafe in the thigh and reek of elderberry wine. Which, honestly, sounds like a decent Friday night in certain circles. And then there's the matter of audience scrutiny. You see, the groundlings, the people who stood packed together near the stage for a penny a head, weren't shy. If your sock slipped mid-monologue, they'd catcall. If your stocking was clearly stolen from someone 2 feet shorter than you, they'd boo. One actor was chased offstage because his petticoat snagged and revealed a foot in an unseasonal plaid sock. A fate worse than death. And yet, these actors were magicians of disguise. They took discarded scraps and stitched together monarchs. They wore wine-stained tights and became gods. They shared socks and became lovers, soldiers, fools, and kings. You can almost hear the rustle of the costume trunk backstage now: heaps of linen, stray feathers, a single boot with no mate. Somewhere in that chaos is a pair of yellow stockings, cross-gartered, absurdly flamboyant. Tomorrow, they'll belong to Malvolio. Today, they're bundled under a ploughman's cloak. And still, the illusion holds. Because it doesn't matter that your socks sag or that your ruff is made of repurposed dishcloths. What matters is how you move in them. What matters is how you feel in them. In that moment on stage, lit by flickering torches and the wide eyes of 100 strangers, your threadbare stockings might as well be spun gold. You plant your feet. You speak your line. You take a step. Your sock slips a little. No one gasps. You smile anyway. Because that's the beauty of it. Theatre is never perfect. And neither are the socks. But you wear them anyway. And in doing so, you create something more real than perfection ever could be. You're pacing behind the stage again, nervous, excited, hungry, maybe all three. The wooden boards creak beneath your feet, and each creak is a tiny reminder of every footfall that's come before yours. You peek down. Today's socks are functional. They're neither the worst nor the best. They're warmish, and that's enough. One might have once been white. The other is aggressively beige. It's a Tuesday matinee. The kind of crowd that's not drunk enough to laugh too hard, but still distracted by vendors hawking hazelnuts and meat pies in the pit. And as you wriggle your toes in your borrowed stockings, you wonder if anyone out there notices just how many miles these socks have walked across scenes, across roles, across years. Because here's the hidden truth: Elizabethan actors didn't just share socks with the living, they inherited them from the dead. You heard that right. Clothing was expensive. Socks, or hose, were even more so when knitted by hand, which meant garments, especially well-made ones, outlived their owners. When an actor died, his costume pieces didn't get buried with him. They were passed on to the company, often bundled into a rough linen bag labeled with his name in charcoal. His sword belt. His stained breeches. His socks. You once opened one of those bags. You didn't mean to. You were looking for a false beard and found instead a rolled bundle of woolen hose, one patched, one frayed, both still warm from the sun-drenched attic where the bag had been sitting. A faint scent of rose oil lingered. Someone had tried to make them presentable. Someone had remembered. That's the thing, clothes remember people. And in the world of early theatre, where there were no photographs or recordings, sometimes a pair of socks was the last physical remnant of an actor's career. They carried the imprint of a man's gait, his nervous tics, the places where the cloth stretched from nightly bows. There's even a fringe tale told by stagehands at the Curtain Theatre, probably apocryphal, but too charming to ignore, about the ghost socks. A pair of purple silk stockings supposedly worn by a beloved clown who died mid-run of a popular farce. Legend claims that every time a new actor wears them, he gets an inexplicable laugh mid-scene, even if the moment isn't funny. Historians, naturally, scoff at this. But not the actors. They swear by the giggle. And then there's the theatrical superstition that you must never burn old socks, especially not those worn on stage. Too much memory in them, they say. Too much soul. So instead, worn-out hose get repurposed into padding for shoulder armor, into dusting cloths for props, or even, occasionally, buried behind the theater. A sock graveyard. The ultimate costume retirement plan. It's not all sentimental. Sometimes it's just necessity. You rehearse 6 days a week, sometimes more. You sweat through your layers. And if you forget to wash your socks, or if the washing barrel hasn't been heated properly, you might find them growing their own cast of characters. Fun gal ones. Historians still debate whether actors were responsible for cleaning their own garments or if a rotating group of wardrobe apprentices handled it. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. You remember one boy who boiled socks in beer, claiming it killed the smell faster than vinegar. It did not. The entire tiring house smelled like a brewery in distress for 3 days. But through all this, something quietly beautiful happens. An unspoken continuity. You slip on someone else's old socks, and you don't just wear fabric. You wear legacy. You step into lines once spoken by others. The costumes change hands, the roles recycle, and theater becomes a living memory machine. There's something oddly intimate about it, too. You've worn socks that once belonged to your mentor, the one who taught you to hold your breath before dramatic pauses. You've worn hose that belonged to a rival you secretly admired. And once, you found a small sewn heart on the inside cuff of a sock, clearly a personal stitch, probably never meant to be seen. You still think about that. It's not always poetic. Sometimes it's deeply uncomfortable. Like the time you had to wear hose from the tall drawer despite being a full foot shorter than the original owner. You spent the entire second act yanking the crotch up from your knees while trying to deliver lines about destiny. But you managed. Because you had to. That's the other truth about Elizabethan theatre. There's no pause button. The show must go on. Even if your sock has a hole the size of a grapefruit. Even if you can feel yesterday's mud crusting around your ankles. Even if your big toe pokes out during your death scene and someone in the third row laughs. Because the audience doesn't know you're wearing old socks. They only see the prince. Or the peasant. Or the spirit of someone long gone. And you carry them forward. One step at a time. So tonight, as you prepare to take the stage, you pause a moment and tug up your mismatched hose. One once belonged to an actor named John, the other has no known history at all. Maybe that's fitting. One foot in the past. One in mystery. You smile. Then you walk out to meet the light. You take the stage once more, heart steady now, though your socks are slipping just a little again. The audience stares up, expectant, and for a brief moment, you wonder, do they know? Can they see it? The little secrets stitched and stretched around your ankles? Probably not. But back here, behind the scenes, everyone knows the socks. Every actor in your company has a sock story, passed around like sacred gossip. A sock that brought good luck on opening night. A pair that always sagged at the worst moment. Hose so absurdly patterned they were banished to comic relief duty forever. And then, of course, there's the long-standing tradition, still half-joke, half-deadly serious, of the company sock box. You know it well. It's a wooden crate tucked in the back of the tiring room, crammed with every lonely, rejected, mismatched, or mended sock in the theatre's orbit. At any given time, there are at least 20-odd hose in there, ranging in hue from possibly cream to angry walnut. If you're in desperate need, that's where you go. You're about to play a merchant. Grab something striped. A soldier. Grab anything thick and not entirely shredded. A woman playing a man playing a woman. Get creative. Layers solve everything. And somehow, no matter how many socks go in, the box never seems to empty. It's like a woolen Bermuda Triangle. Or a clown car. Or, more accurately, the lifeblood of continuity in a theater with no budget and no boundaries. Because when all else fails, when your personal costume is too threadbare, or you've spilled wine backstage, or the apprentice who was supposed to wash the wardrobe accidentally set it on fire again, you go to the box. It's funny, isn't it? A nobleman can stride onto stage in crushed velvet and golden chains, but if his socks are held up with a bit of twine and hope, nobody really notices. Or maybe they do, and that's part of the charm. The Elizabethan stage wasn't about perfection. It was about spectacle stitched together with sweat and imagination. That's why shared socks weren't a flaw, they were a feature. They were proof that this art form, this chaotic, breathless act of pretending, was made by real people cobbling it together with what they had. It's hard not to laugh when you think of what modern audiences might say if they knew the truth. That the epic tragedy they paid to see was brought to life by an actor wearing the same socks that played Bottom the Weaver last month. And Henry V before that. And maybe a witch from Macbeth last year, who can say? Historians still argue whether certain costumes and sock pairings were deliberately kept for recurring roles. There's some fragmentary ledger evidence of dark hose for villain use only, scribbled in the margin of a prop list. A fringe scholar even claims to have found a sock rotation chart in the records of a provincial troupe, a sort of pre-modern Excel sheet mapping who wore what and when. Of course, it's all guesswork. Most records weren't that meticulous. And honestly, half the time, people just grabbed whatever was clean, or at least not damp. That's how the tradition of pre-stage sock swaps began. You'd see it in the wings. Two actors bartering before a show like medieval merchants. I'll give you my grey hose if you give me the red ones. Red's got a hole. Yes, but it's on the heel and I'm sitting the whole scene. Fine, but you owe me first pick next market play. No money changed hands. Just favors, goodwill, and a shared understanding that socks were survival. They were currency. And sometimes, weirdly, a mark of trust. There's a story every company has about the actor who always wore their own socks. Clean, pressed, tight around the calves. Never shared. Never swapped. Never offered. They didn't last long. Not because of hygiene or snobbery, but because it broke the code. You see, in an environment where everything was shared, the stage, the space, the spotlight, selfishness stood out. And socks, ridiculous as it sounds, were the test. If you could hand off your only halfway decent pair to a new apprentice who forgot his, you belonged. There's even a joke actors used to tell, whispered around campfires and alehouses. Give a man a role, and he'll act for a night. Share your socks, and he'll forget his lines in comfort. Classic. The sock bonds ran deep, too. One year, your company staged Julius Caesar in mid-autumn, in the middle of an open-air theater during an unseasonable cold snap. Everyone froze. Your breath came out in puffs like dragon smoke. The floor was slick with frost. And yet, no one wanted to cancel. You all huddled backstage, stuffing straw into boots, doubling up cloaks, and yes, trading socks like survivalists. It didn't fix the cold, but it brought a kind of warmth anyway. One old actor, half frostbitten but grinning, looked down at his third pair of mismatched hose and declared, "Never thought I'd storm the Senate dressed like a shepherd, but here we are." The show went on. As always. And later that night, after the final bow, someone found a sock on stage. Just lying there. A casualty of drama. It was claimed, eventually, but only after a round of guessing and gentle teasing. You can't buy that kind of camaraderie. It's woven, thread by thread, into the very fabric of performance. And when you step out into the light again, half aware of your worn-out heels and slightly itchy calves, you know it doesn't matter. Because somewhere out there, maybe in the pit or up in the galleries, a wide-eyed child is watching you speak with awe. They don't see the fray. They see the poetry. They see the story. And so, you walk, careful not to trip on your friend's socks. And if you do, you'll blame the ghost socks. Obviously. You're back in the tiring room, breathless and flushed, the scent of sweat and candle wax clinging to your clothes. A crowd just cheered your final monologue, though you're pretty sure someone in the front row was more impressed by your footwork than your verse. And why not? That fancy turn you did in Act 4 nearly spun your sock clean off. You collapse onto the bench, peeling off one boot and revealing, yep, a sock with a hole so large, your big toe gives a triumphant little wave to the world. Still alive, you mutter. Barely. But before you can stash the offending sock away, another actor wanders past, eyeing it like it owes him money. That mine? He asks, squinting. Could be. It's got a stain that looks like Denmark. Yep. That's mine. You hand it over. No ceremony. Just mutual understanding. Because, really, by now, whose socks even are they anymore? Here's the thing most people forget. Elizabethan theatre wasn't just art. It was a communal ecosystem, held together by ritual, trust, and shared fabric, sometimes literally. You weren't just sharing a stage. You were sharing shoes, sweat, and strange little superstitions passed down from actor to actor like inherited curses. And none were stranger than sock luck. According to some theatre folk, certain socks carried blessings. Others, definitely cursed. One infamous pair, striped with purple and green, was blamed for 3 missed cues, a spontaneous nosebleed, and one actor breaking into giggles during a ghost scene. The socks were ceremoniously burned behind the theatre. The smoke, reportedly, smelled like betrayal and boiled cabbage. Of course, historians still argue whether these superstitions were sincere or just a way to avoid responsibility. One scholar claims sock law evolved as a morale tool, a way to give actors a sense of control in a wildly unpredictable profession. Another insists it's just the natural outcome of giving stressed out, sleep-deprived artists access to costume bins and ale. Either way, it stuck. Actors began to track their sock runs, which roles brought success in which pairs. Some even marked the inner cuffs with discrete symbols, a stitched star for a strong performance, a subtle X for disaster. One sock, known simply as the Lucky Blue, became legend. It was soft wool, faded with time, and had been worn during a now iconic performance of The Merchant of Venice. Or maybe Titus Andronicus. No one actually agrees. But what they do agree on. Whoever wore it next always got a standing ovation, or at least a well-timed bird call. And so, the sock was passed carefully from actor to actor, a treasured heirloom in an otherwise throwaway wardrobe. There was even a waiting list. You once had it for a single week, during a run of Twelfth Night. You didn't die. That was considered a good omen. Not every sock got such glory, though. Most simply disappeared, lost between benches or stolen by rats or buried under stage dust. Some went home in the wrong boots. Others were turned into makeshift dust rags. One, famously, was used as an emergency glove during a freezing performance in December. The fingers never recovered, but the play got through. And then there were the sock farewells. When a pair finally gave out, holes too wide, elasticity shot, mystery stains resembling several countries, and possibly a roast goose, there was a moment of silence. Sometimes even applause. A few times, a sock was wrapped in parchment and placed in the prop chest like a tiny, woolen mummy. You laugh now, remembering the first time you witnessed one. The actor folded the sock with great reverence, kissed it, then solemnly whispered, "He dies not in vain. He dies in verse." The next actor tripped over it 15 minutes later. Theatre karma. Still, the practice persists. Because somehow, these shared, threadbare, often ridiculous garments become more than just foot coverings. They become totems. Symbols of endurance. Of making do. Of playing 5 characters in a row while sweating through a tunic that smells vaguely of onions and bad decisions. Because this is theatre, and theatre has always thrived on chaos cloaked in elegance. On kings wearing borrowed boots. On queens whose corsets are held together with fishing line. On the socks that connect them all, carrying traces of every role and every actor who ever stepped into their stretched out heels. You pause to slip on a new pair now, well, new to you. They're cleanish. One is tighter than the other. The toe seam pinches slightly. But they'll do. Outside, the audience is already shifting. You hear them talking, laughing, waiting. Another show begins soon. And maybe the next time you take the stage, you'll be wearing socks that once belonged to a pirate. Or a priest. Or a peasant pretending to be a priest pretending to be a pirate. The layers never really end. The socks might sag. The threads might break. But the performance goes on. Because, despite the fading dyes and mismatched pairs, these garments still carry something strange and powerful. Memory. Not just of lines and roles and exits pursued by bears, but of people. Of laughter in the tiring room. Of whispered advice before the curtain rose. Of warm applause and cold nights and backstage games of guess who wore it last. And in a world where everything is fleeting, where even the greatest soliloquy is gone the moment it's spoken, it's comforting to think that some part of you might live on in a borrowed sock. Even if it has a hole the size of Wales. Your last scene ends not with a flourish, but with a soft exhale. A single candle gutters in the wings, echoing your breath. The boards underfoot creak gently as the other actors melt into the darkened tiring room, peeling off borrowed robes and grinning through exhaustion. It's quiet now, except for the soft slap of hose against thighs and the scraping of a stool dragged closer to the fire. You sit, unlacing your boots, your feet aching, your ankles sore, and pull off your socks. They're not even your socks. One has a faded pink stripe and the other a pale green patch near the toe. They've traveled through 3 tragedies, 2 mistaken identity plots, and 1 impromptu thunderstorm. They've been stepped on, slept in, rinsed out in a basin shared by 7 actors, and if rumor is to be believed, once belonged to the ghost of a jester. You smile. And toss them into the box by the fire. Someone will wear them tomorrow. And tomorrow, the show begins again. Because the Elizabethan stage was never just wood and paint. It was a revolving door of human lives and threadbare costumes. A living, breathing collage of noise, hope, invention, and yes, a deeply unglamorous reality of fabric shortages, body odor, and communal socks. Yet somehow, it all worked. Actors turned 2 pairs of socks into a full season's worth of noblemen. Tailors worked miracles with a single bolt of recycled velvet. Stagehands invented new ways to pin sleeves together with fishhooks and luck. And always, someone was out there maybe slipping into someone else's worn-out hosiery and stepping into someone else's life for the space of a single act. There's something almost magical about it. You see, it wasn't just the words that made the stage come alive. It was the shared breath, the shared fabric, the unspoken promise that what you wore didn't matter as much as how you wore it. A crumpled collar could suggest a broken heart. A neatly darned sock might imply silent pride. A rip in the heel? Maybe it's just poor sewing. Or maybe it's a clue. Historians still argue whether audiences picked up on these quiet costume cues, or whether they were simply too distracted by the sword fights. Some say the clothes told silent stories. Others say it was all chaos. The truth? Probably a bit of both. You think of the wardrobe chest again, the mix of wool and silk, of velvet cloaks and peasant tunics, of one earring lost long ago inside a battered hat. Inside it, there are still stories waiting. Still socks waiting. But as we pull back from the bustle of backstage, something else becomes clear. What truly held the stage together wasn't fine brocade or carefully creased trousers. It wasn't lace cuffs or imported dyes. It was the willingness to share, to borrow, to make do with what little you had and still step out into the light like a monarch. Shared socks weren't just about poverty or practicality. They were a symbol of community. They whispered, "We're all in this together. Your left foot might be warmer than your right, but at least you're not barefoot. And maybe tomorrow, I'll wear your lucky green pair." Even the most celebrated actors wore second-hand garments. Even the noblest characters shared legwear with fools and extras. No one was exempt. The sock box didn't discriminate. You look down at your feet, bare now, wiggling in the warmth from the fire. Someone chuckles behind you. Someone else offers a rag to clean off the mud from your last dramatic entrance. Someone is holding your next pair of socks. "Try these," they say. They were lucky today. You accept them, smiling, half believing. Maybe they were. Maybe they will be. Because in this world, every detail matters. Every piece of fabric has a story. And every sock, no matter how tattered, might carry a bit of magic in the toe. Or at least a laugh. You tug them on. One's tighter than the other. Of course it is. But somehow, that feels just right. And as the final lanterns dim, you feel the stage breathe with you. One more night behind you. One more pair of borrowed socks under your belt, feet. And tomorrow, the show goes on. Because it always does. Now the curtain has fallen, and the boards beneath your feet have grown still. The stage lights, if you squint, seem to dissolve into distant stars. Your costume's off. The crowd is gone. The noise has faded to a comforting hush, like the sound of wind whispering across an empty field. You sit there, barefoot once more, in the quiet that follows creation. There's something deeply soothing in the simplicity of it all. A sock, passed from hand to hand. A threadbare garment, worn with dignity. A moment of shared silence before the next laugh, the next tragedy, the next monologue shouted into the dark. This is the part that never gets written into the plays. The exhale after the applause. The slow peel of sweat-damp stockings from tired legs. The soft thunk of a boot dropped on the floor. Let your eyes close now. Let the flicker of those old footlights dim into the background of your thoughts. The theater will be there tomorrow. The sock box will still be waiting. And maybe, just maybe, the lucky blue pair will find their way to you. But for now, no more cues. No more hurried changes. No more pretending to be someone else. Just the stillness. Just your breath. Just the quiet promise of sleep, curling around you like a curtain falling gently over the stage. You made it through the whole story, even with your socks slipping. Good night.